Hello, friends. Now you're going to hear a brief summary of the movie The Island. Enjoy watching. A crime boss, Manuel Alvarez, took a liking to a young American singer. He invited Nora to his table and then offered her a job singing in his club. During their conversation, a waiter accidentally spilled wine on her dress. Akeem apologized profusely, but Alvarez wasn't satisfied. He slit the waiter's throat with a knife and casually sat back down as if nothing had happened. Akeem's body was dumped into the sea. We are introduced to Mark, a Los Angeles police officer. He and his partner are working undercover and are currently in the middle of a major drug deal. Jose showed them the bags of powder, and Mark ordered Phil to hand over the money. A bald thug didn't like that. Phil tossed the bag on the ground and demanded he pick it up. A fight broke out. Mark revealed his badge and read Jose his rights. When Jose made a sudden move, the officer knocked him out. By that time, Phil had also dealt with his own aggressive opponent. Mark answered a phone call and learned that his younger brother, Akeem, had been murdered. He returned to his home island to bury Akeem and support their mother. A local woman, Akila, asked Mark to visit her later. Even the killer, Manuel Alvarez, expressed his condolences to the grieving mother. The woman told her eldest son that life on the island had changed drastically in recent years, but she didn't want him getting involved in any conflicts. The LA cop stopped by the local police station, where his old friend Nate worked. The bald officer explained that they were understaffed and overwhelmed, so they hadn't been able to find anything about Akeem's death. It was possibly the work of a gang from a neighboring island. Akila teaches karate to children. She and Mark were once engaged. She confirmed that gangs from other islands were terrorizing the area, and she warned him not to trust Nate. He was just as scared as everyone else. Manuel Alvarez owned everything on the island. In just 4 years, he had bought up everything he could. The gangs left him alone because they worked for him. Akeem had been employed by Alvarez for only 2 months before his tragic fate. Mark decided to meet the Oligarch and went to his club. The wealthy man advised the cop to calm down, claiming that Akeem had finished his shift and gone home. He suggested that the young man might have gotten involved with a gang. Alvarez then gave Mark the address of a den where criminals usually hung out, saying Akeem liked to visit after work. Mark wasn't convinced and hinted that he would soon get rid of Alvarez. The crime boss ordered one of his gangs to take care of the cop. Mark visited an old friend, borrowed a sledgehammer, and smashed a concrete slab. Underneath, he had hidden a crate filled with an arsenal of weapons. That evening, Mark went to the club Alvarez had mentioned. He cut the music and demanded to see the boss. He only wanted to talk, but the gang members immediately pulled their guns on him. It was clear they weren't locals, as they hadn't heard of his reputation. Mark quickly disarmed one of them and continued questioning them about Akeem. However, these thugs only understood brute force. Mark beat them up, breaking some of their bones in the process. The boss struggled for a while, but eventually he, too, ended up on the ground. One of the criminals admitted that they had been hired specifically to deal with Mark. Another gang arrived on motorcycles and opened fire, forcing Mark to flee. He managed to knock one motorcyclist out with a wooden plank, but 2 others continued chasing him. However, the cops successfully hid. Alvarez ordered the attackers to go to Mark's mother's house and use her as bait. The criminals broke into the home and searched every room. They found the woman in the bedroom and ruthlessly shot her. However, it turned out that only a couple of pillows were under the blanket. Mark had wisely sent his mother to stay with Akila for safety. Nate arrived at the crime scene. One of the gang members had been killed. The officer was informed that someone had broken into Mark's mother's house. Mark hoped his friend would help him cleanse the island of all the scum. Finally, Nate provided assistance and advised Mark to speak with the singer from the club. She was working the night Akeem was murdered. Meanwhile, Alvarez was furious at the motorcyclists for failing him. He had the trio forced to their knees. 2 of them were suffocated with plastic bags, while the third, who had at least provided some useful information, finding a photo of Mark and the karate instructor, was immediately rewarded with a bullet to the head. Alvarez then ordered his bodyguard to call in professional assassins. Mark visited the terrified singer at her home. He promised to help her escape the island if she answered his questions. Nora would be returning to the US that very night, where she would be protected by Mark's friend. These words convinced her to reveal everything she knew. Alvarez had killed the waiter simply for spilling wine. Mark asked Nate to escort the singer and ensure she left the island safely. In the meantime, ruthless mercenaries had arrived to eliminate Mark. The cop also revealed to his mother that Manuel Alvarez had personally killed Akeem. Nate handed Nora a plane ticket. Once in America, Mark's partner, Phil, would take care of her. The assassins began searching for Akila. They arrived at her house, but Mark spotted them and led his loved ones out through the back exit. The armed squad followed them into the forest. Mark called Nate for backup. When the officer arrived at the house, the gunman opened fire on him as well. Akila was skilled with weapons. Alongside Mark, she took down one of the mercenaries. The rest, realizing they were facing unexpected resistance, decided to retreat. They hadn't expected a fight. Alvarez soon found out that the singer had escaped. He had deliberately gotten Nora addicted to drugs, expecting her to remain in a constant haze. Furious at the underling who had failed to keep her under control, he punished him by shoving an entire bag of drugs into his mouth. Mark hid Akila and his mother with some trusted acquaintances to make it harder for Alvarez's men to find them. However, Akila refused to stay in hiding. She was determined to help defend her island. Nate printed out a dossier on Alvarez's gang and asked a priest to safeguard the documents in case anything happened to him. Alvarez was now deeply worried. If Nora testified against him, the police would issue an international warrant for his arrest, and that would be the end of him. His bodyguard came up with a way to silence the determined cop, though it would require getting their hands dirty. Mark was supposed to meet Nate at the old mill that night. A police car arrived, but the officer inside wasn't responding. A mysterious figure stepped away from the vehicle. Inside, Nate was slumped over, badly beaten. He was shot on the spot, and gunfire erupted toward Mark. Akila was captured but managed to fight off one of the mercenaries. However, the bodyguard used a stun gun to knock her out and dragged her into a car. Mark rushed to Nate's side, but his old friend died right in front of him. That was the breaking point. Furious, Mark stormed into a church during a sermon and addressed the local residents. He exposed everything Manuel Alvarez had done, revealing that just yesterday he had even killed the police chief. Mark called on the people to help him find Akila and stop the devil who had taken over their island. As promised, the priest handed Mark the hidden documents. Meanwhile, Akila woke up in an abandoned building. Alvarez had assigned his lover, Carla, to keep an eye on her. There were only 4 overweight cops left on the island. Mark was appointed their temporary chief. It was finally time for them to put in some real work. Mark stayed at the police station waiting for Alvarez. While searching Nate's computer, he discovered that his friend had managed to open a case against the crime lord and his entire cartel. 2 young spies spotted Alvarez's bodyguard near an abandoned motel and informed Mark. Unexpectedly, his partner Phil arrived on the island. Mark would definitely need his help. At sunset, Alvarez called Mark and suggested a meeting the next day at the ruins of an old factory. He proposed a trade, Akila in exchange for singer Nora. The next morning, the local cops, along with Phil, began searching the abandoned motel. They encountered a single guard. He was killed, but 1 officer was wounded. At the ruins, Alvarez's bodyguard searched Mark before the crime boss himself arrived. Mark lied, saying Nora was on her way. It was crucial that Phil found Akila as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Carla executed another officer. Phil stepped forward, shotgun raised, pretending to surrender. But as soon as Carla lowered her guard, he took her out with a hidden pistol. Finally, he found Akila, but another guard snuck up behind him, demanding that he drop his weapon. Phil quickly cut the rope binding Akila's legs, allowing her to take down the thug. Phil finished him off with a shotgun blast. Mark learned that Akila was safe and, with a mocking tone, informed Alvarez that he he would never see Nora again. Furious, the crime boss ordered his men to kill the hostage over the radio, but no one responded. Alvarez's attempt to kill Mark also failed. The cop disarmed his bodyguard, and suddenly, it was revealed that dozens of armed locals had taken position within the ruins. Mark challenged Alvarez to a fair fight. The crime lord pulled out a knife, but it didn't help him. Punch, then a kick. Alvarez was completely disoriented. Mark slowly plunged a knife into his shoulder before delivering the final blow, driving the blade into the villain's throat. Alvarez died the same way Akeem had. Mark had cleansed the island and chose to stay there with Aquila. And with that, the movie comes to an end. See you soon, and goodbye everyone.